Sylvie Delacroix, who is going to talk about data trusts as bottom-up data empowerment infrastructure. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first, I should say that I'm really sorry not to be here in person today, as I think really we need more of these kinds of cross-disciplinary events if we're going to make progress on questions that really suffer, in my view, from a lack of cross-disciplinary engagement. So I am a lawyer and a philosopher by training, so you might wonder what I can possibly bring to a conference full of computer scientists and data scientists like yours. Well, I should answer that by first saying that, well, the questions I like to ask myself start with questions that are quite fundamental, like what is it that we talk about when we talk about data? And actually, the very act of defining data is a value-loaded one, and it does lead to problems. I think we've been hijacked to some extent by the fact that these very successful machine learning technologies have developed very fast and have encouraged a definition of data as an asset that is not entirely helpful, and I'll explain why. So I think my talk today is meant to basically make at least 2 points. The first point is that I think data as a resource defies all traditional legal and economic tools of analysis, and we need to do better. We need to be creative when it comes to putting together new frameworks, and that's what I'm going to try to do today. And the second thing I'm going to try and say today is positive, I suppose, and it's to try and emphasize the extent to which we can actually achieve several things in one go by creating bottom-up data empowerment infrastructure. And I will explain what I mean by that. But effectively, I see this need for bottom-up infrastructure as crucial to achieve at least 2 objectives. One is, well, we need to share data more intelligently. Yeah, there is no question that today there are many fancy AI tools that we are struggling to bring to their full potential for one simple and depressing reason: we are not sharing data as intelligently as we could. Now, I think we can do a lot better than what we currently manage to do, in part if we bother to create a bottom-up data empowerment infrastructure, and I will explain what that is. The second big draw, if you want, of this bottom-up data infrastructure consists in the fact that they also allow us to address seriously, and not just by ticking boxes, the fact that there are serious vulnerabilities at stake when it comes to exploiting personal data, whether it's for research purposes or for other purposes. And so that calls for solutions that do better than simple consent as we experience it today, where we're all clicking away these pop-up consent windows, which encourage just a culture of passivity, which I think is highly detrimental to what we need to achieve. And what we need to achieve today is to actually raise awareness of the importance of data as a source of various common goods, including, better use of natural resources, better medical outcomes, etc., etc. And I think if we don't manage to raise awareness and also beat this habit of passivity that has taken hold in large part because we overly depend on top-down regulation. So if we don't manage to take that seriously, and I think it's actually getting to the point now where the window for action is getting shorter and shorter. But so in short, my point today is to argue for the need for bottom-up data infrastructure. Now, to do that, I will start by considering the merits of a data river analogy. Have you ever thought about data and the way in which it resembles, in some ways, rivers as a resource? Well, just like a river, data can be a source of wealth for some and a source of vulnerability for many others. It can also be a public resource for many communities, right? So where a river can be diverted for milling or irrigation purposes, it can also give rise to navigation and fishing rights, anti-pollution prohibitions, and flooding risks. And by the time water-powered technology enabled the Industrial Revolution, and that was mostly in the 19th or 18th century, actually, what's interesting is that by that time, we already had various ways of juggling those coexisting privileges and responsibilities that had been developed in various parts of the world. And the problem is that this is not true when it comes to data. Yeah, you could argue that what we're experiencing today is a new form of revolution, not an industrial one, maybe an AI-powered one. Yeah.
Are you showing some slides?
I will share slides, just not immediately. Is that okay?
Okay.
In 5 minutes. I know you're used to having slides, but I'm going to talk for more. In total, actually, how long do you want me to talk, just so I can adjust? Okay, I'll just continue. So, I'll. Pardon?
Sorry, 35 minutes you have.
Okay, that's great. So I was talking about this analogy between rivers and data, right? And I was arguing that one of the problems is that rivers, they enabled the Industrial Revolution at the 18th century, but we had already developed ways of juggling all these coexisting responsibilities and privileges that are needed when you manage the upstream and downstream needs of people who live along the river. The problem is that data and the role it plays now in various machine learning technologies, it has developed in a way that wasn't preceded by this culture of learning to balance all sorts of competing rights and responsibilities. Instead, we had, like the scene was hijacked by effectively, you could call them millers, yeah, people who build canals and fed these big, massive industries that we know today, which are data dependent, without any regard for the fact that data, just like rivers, has many uses and can lead to also considerable vulnerabilities like flooding, etc. And so what you could argue we are experiencing today is a result of like a Wild West rush for gold, in this case rush for data, which has happened without being preceded by a culture of learning to juggle competing rights and responsibilities. And as a result, we live under the domination of, we are dominated by this definition of data as an asset that's subject to property rights. And this definition of data that as an asset subject to property rights is incredibly unhelpful, right? So as soon as we actually consider data away from the canal banks imposed by vast industries, we not only have to come to terms with the legitimacy of a variety of coexisting privileges, responsibilities, and obligations, we must also adjust to the fact that what is at stake in the allocation of those privileges, etc., is unlike that which characterizes the exploitation of a river. Okay, so here comes the limit of the analogy between data and river. That analogy is interesting, but what makes it particularly helpful in a way is where it fails. And data is also unlike a river, largely because much of the data critical to wealth generation today is increasingly tied to political endeavors to consider different futures. Yeah. So some of these endeavors include processes of identity reconstruction at an individual or collective level. And this means that, or this entails vulnerabilities that are very different in kind from the vulnerabilities you experience on the riverbank, for instance. Okay. And it also means that questions of distributive justice or fairness are only one aspect, although the most visible at the moment, of the challenge that is inherent in coming to grips with data as a resource that's basically unmatched at the moment. So yes, when we talk about the value of data, I think it really matters to resist the tendency to reduce the realm of pertinent considerations to economic ones only. And what I'm going to say today is really to try and open up your perspective on the social and political value of data, and hence the impact it should have when you design all sorts of data-dependent tools, let's call them machine learning tools. Okay, so now I am going to try and share my slide. You'll be pleased to hear. Share screen. Okay. So hopefully you can all see my screen. Shout no if you can't. Okay, so I assume you can see it. Now, the reason I delayed showing my screen is because I didn't want to start straight away with this word bottom-up data trust. Now, bottom-up data trust today, it's not just theory, I'm excited to say, it's also actually a concrete initiative that is led by 3 pilots that have been launched literally 2 months ago. So it's a live, concrete, you could call it an experiment. And I'm going to try to explain what these bottom-up data trusts are. So data trusts basically provide a positive answer to what is first and foremost a political question. And that question is, can we return the power that stems from aggregated data to individuals and groups? Now, our answer, and I wrote the initial paper at the root of this whole proposal with Neil Lawrence 3 years ago, our answer is yes. And given the vulnerabilities at stake, this power should be returned via a legal mechanism that comes with robust institutional safeguards. Now, we happen to have these safeguards in the form of trust law. And so the argument is we better use this existing and dusty part of law, this time to reverse rather than reinforce what is essentially a feudal data structure today. Now, this picture was chosen not by us, but by the FT, and it looks a bit more bloody than I had anticipated. But it's interesting because it shows the extent to which this political empowerment dimension is important. And there's also a very real risk that it may fail and potentially lead to violence, but I hope not. So to appreciate this political dimension, it really helps to draw a parallel with a historical precedent. You may or may not know that in the 19th century in the UK, the right to vote was conditional upon land ownership. Now, to widen the right to vote and give a political voice to otherwise disenfranchised people, land societies were created to collectively buy a strip of land, which was then divided up. Well, the idea behind data trust is similar. Here, what's at stake is not the right to vote, but the ability to have a say over how one's data is used and for what purposes. So instead of pooling together money to acquire a piece of land, what's pooled together are data rights. Okay, now this is really important because it means it's not necessarily the data itself, and I'll come back to that. Now, data trusts are in a position to address what I see as effectively 3 problems, to make it simple. First, we lack tools for collective action. Yeah, much of our legal systems today are very focused on individuals, but we're very ill-equipped when it comes to facilitating collective action. And when it comes to data, actually, individual rights are ill-fitting, given the challenges at stake. Now, the second problem is that data consent today is rarely more than make-believe. I mean, you can think of the pop-up windows you've just clicked away this morning, or there are many examples. And then the third problem is the need to share data more intelligently. Yeah, I started by highlighting that. Clearly, we can do better, and data trust have the potential to considerably improve things. Now, the key point about data trust is that they need a data trustee, right? At the heart of a data trust is the data trustee. Now, these data trustees have a fiduciary obligation of undivided loyalty towards the beneficiaries of the trust. Now, in this case, the beneficiaries of the trust are us, the data subjects, okay, those who join a data trust. Now, a fiduciary obligation sounds lovely. It's probably the strongest type of safeguards law can provide, at least private law. But if it doesn't come with real teeth, you could argue that it provides false assurances and in that way do more harm than good. Well, actually what's interesting about trust, and the reason why I got interested in this and Neil got interested in this, is that they are basically providing concrete institutional safeguards. Like, for instance, each trust is overseen by a court, and that court has significant intervention powers. So if something goes wrong, it's not for the participants in the data trust to show that something has gone wrong. The burden of proof is reversed. and the court can intervene and remove a data trustee if they feel he or she is not acting in the best interest of those in the data trust. Now, you might ask, and that's okay, trust law sounds rather complicated, especially an audience like yours. You might think, why are we even listening to something about trust law? And you could ask, well, do we really need fiduciary obligations? Can we not rely on contracts, like there's the form of law that we're all familiar with? Well, to answer that question, it's useful to think of data trustees as the much needed 21st century profession. So just like progress in the medical sciences gave rise to the medical profession back in the 19th century, today we badly need data trustees as a new 21st century profession. And just like we wouldn't ask whether doctors' fiduciary obligations are really necessary, to ask whether we really need data trustees as a fiduciary intermediary layer is to miss the point. What's the point? Well, the point is that it's a value-based choice. Yes, we can and should build other forms of data institutions. There are many, data co-ops, data commons, etc. And these other forms of data institutions can be based on contract or corporate structures. So they all have a role to play. I'm not here to deny that. But what's important is to note that those contractual or corporate structures cannot give you the level of safeguards that trust offers. So you will have to choose a structure that's appropriate for your aims, for the level of risk you envisage, and for the nature of the vulnerabilities at stake. In short, if you're going to try to create a structure that handles personal data, you probably want the maximal level of safeguards. Now, it's time to get concrete, enough of legal and theoretical points. If you do go for data trust as your solution to basically making data sharing easier and safer for everybody, and also as a way of doing better than mere consent, you're faced with several implementation choices. And I will only mention a couple for now. First, the governance structure of a data trust can be highly participatory or completely hands-off, right? Second, and that's really important because I get a lot of misunderstandings, the data does not need to be stored centrally, right? In fact, the data does not need to be pooled at all. It could remain on wherever it is, on the servers of Google, Facebook, or whichever service providers you're thinking of. In this scenario, the job of the data trustee is to exercise the data rights on behalf of the beneficiaries and to leverage those rights to obtain better terms and conditions, for instance, or to negotiate new data sharing deals, for instance, for medical research, etc. Now, here's for a dream scenario. Sometimes it shocks people to see that. But imagine being able to go shopping on Amazon, knowing that you've logged into Amazon via your data trust, which has then set the terms and conditions according to which your data can be collected. Goodbye pop-up windows, they won't be missed. And basically, you could say, yeah, but Sylvie, that's lovely, but you're talking of something highly idealistic here. Of course, for a data trust to have the kind of negotiating power with an entity like Amazon, you would want to have a fairly big data trust, right? So it presupposes a kind of network effect where enough people have joined the data trust en masse. And yes, I won't deny that. So this scenario is not going to happen tomorrow. So what can happen in the meantime? Well, there are many things that can happen in the meantime. First, there's a few challenges that we need to confront, and I'm going to come back to those slides. I'll go to challenges now. I think among all the challenges, there are many. I'm not even going to try and list all the challenges that stand in the way. One of the first ones is, of course, that we have a low level of data awareness. Okay, so one of the key questions here is how do we make sure that data trusts do not end up empowering only the least vulnerable part of the population, right? That's going to be a problem. And what do you do with all people who do nothing? What if the only people who join data trust are those who are actually the least vulnerable because they know all about the risk they're taking when they share data online, etc. Well, you could consider all sorts of solutions. There's one that involves a default data trust to which people would be assigned in the absence of choice. There are others as well. All of them have problems. All of them will need some degree of oversight, right? So you're gonna need, in my opinion, some oversight mechanism. Just like we have a charity commission that oversees charities, I think there's an argument to say that you would need an oversight body that oversees data trust. Now, the second challenge is you might worry that basically this could lead to a race to the bottom, right? What if data trusts compete with each other? Because remember, data trust, one of the key arguments for data trust is to say, from now on, we are leaving the one-size-fits-all approach to data governance, and we are enabling people to choose a data trust that reflects their aspirations and attitude to risk, etc. So that's why I had this little, I'm not a very good drawer, but remember that slide where this guy or this lady has a trolley, shopping trolley, and she's trying to choose a data trust. And she's hesitating between a data trust that maximizes financial returns and another data trust that, say, gives us a priority, the maximizing better use of natural resources and medical research, and then another one that maximizes security. Yes, you could imagine all sorts of like relative priorities. So you kind of choose the data trust that seems like a good fit, and then you can shop around and change, let's say, if you change your mind or if your aspirations evolve, etc. There's something appealing about acknowledging the fact that people have different attitudes when it comes to data and the risks it entails. And so rather than have a blanket approach, you could give them a choice, right? Now, that's all very good, you might say, but what if all those data trusts competing against each other start competing by offering the maximum financial returns? And so as a result, pushing people to sell more and more of their data in a way that could be argued to be just not empowering at all and actually actively unethical. Well, the answer to that is twofold. One is, I do think that at some point we're going to need active legislation that states which kinds of data can be monetized and which kinds of data cannot, right? At the moment, we're still a bit, well, in the, let's call it the Middle Ages of data governance. And I think there's going to need to be intervention at a legislative level on that front. The other side is to say that that's why I'm insisting on data trustees as a new profession. Yeah, just like in principle, doctors could be competing against each other, trying to offer treatments that are actually pointless and probably do harm, more harm than good. In most cases, doctors tend to hold themselves to better standards than that, in part because there's a professional body, in part because they join the medical profession out of altruistic motives, etc., etc. It doesn't prevent rotten apples, but to think of data trustees as a new profession is to acknowledge the idea that regulation is not only going to happen at the top level. You need several layers, and one of them will be at the level of data trustees themselves. Okay, back to the challenges. So I've talked about the race to the bottom. I've talked about the low levels of data awareness. In fact, yeah, I've mentioned the 3 challenges on my slide. I think I'm going to actually focus now on what is actually happening today in the Data Trust Initiative. So it's really exciting that in the space of 3 years, we've moved from theory, a paper published in the International Journal for Data Privacy Law, to practice. We've launched the first pilots worldwide, the first data trust pilots. And in a nutshell, so you can get more details about these pilots here in this website, datatrust.uk. But in a nutshell, the 3 pilots are, one of them is focused on the place, basically a fishing community that is suffering from several forms of embedded inequalities. And the idea is to see whether a data trust could be built with the purpose of facilitating a community-led approach to the governance of their data. which data do they want to pull together, which ones do they not, for what purpose, etc. So that's like a place-based data trust. We have one that's piggybacking on an existing NHS study, longitudinal study of babies born in Scotland, where the idea is to say, could we offer as an alternative to the traditional consent route, a data trust route? And what I find fascinating in that pilot is that we stand a chance of learning why some people might choose the traditional consent route, while others might choose a data trust route. And what we learn along the way will be very precious, I think. And then the third pilot, in fact, a lot of you should be aware of that one, is basically focusing on the 1.5 million or so people who have opted out of sharing their data this summer with the, the proposal was to share your GP records with a number of entities, let's put it this way. And you had the choice of opting out, and 1.5 million so people opted out. And here the idea is to offer those people the opportunity to join the data trust that might give them a sense of more agency over how their data is used, for what purposes, etc. And again, I think we stand to learn a lot because it's all very good to think that in theory it offers a lot of benefits. At the end of the day, what we need to find out is whether people understand and want this kind of bottom-up infrastructure, or if it doesn't work, what are the alternatives? Okay. I'll briefly mention this slide. It's a bit complicated actually for a slide, but it's on the website datatrust.uk, where it helps to understand the kind of questions you want to consider when you're choosing a data sharing structure. Yeah. So I mentioned that there are many possible data sharing structures. And if you want to have a very helpful summary, go to that report, Exploring Legal Mechanisms for Data Stewardship. This was published by the Ada Lovelace Institute and the UK AI Council 6 months ago. It took like 1.5 years to put together. I was part of the data trust group. And it's a fantastic synthesis of the kind of landscape when it comes to data stewardship solutions. Okay, I think I'm going to end here, so I'll be spot on time. I'll be very happy to take questions. This is what it's all about at my end. So thank you for your attention, and look forward to answering questions.